PETA, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, have sent a letter to the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club requesting that Phil be retired to a sanctuary and that the annual weather-predicting ceremony be replaced by a coin toss. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. Each week on this podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 11, Chapter 12.
Groundhog Day.
PETA is at it again, this time taking on Groundhog Day. PETA and Groundhog Day. I'm not a big fan of either. PETA's previous campaigns have included erecting a fake headstone in the cemetery where Colonel Sanders was buried. The engraved headstone appeared to be a tribute to him, but was really an acrostic poem with the hidden message, KFC tortures birds. It was PETA who wrote to Ben and Jerry's, suggesting they make their ice cream from human mother's milk. They compared dog kennel clubs to the Ku Klux Klan, seeking pure bloodlines. They handed out notes to children on the street whose mothers were wearing fur, and also included bloody images, saying, "Your mother kills animals." In a less offensive but equally strange campaign, PETA advocated for changing animal references in our language, likening them to racial slurs or gender-inappropriate terms. Example, instead of "be the guinea pig," PETA said we should say "be the test tube." Bring home the bacon? No, bring home the bagels. Feed 2 birds with 1 scone. When you take some action, grab the flower by the thorns. Oh, the list was lengthy, but it never caught on. I guess it wasn't the elephant in the room. Turned out to be a wild goose chase. I guess most people had bigger fish to fry. PETA tied consuming cow's milk to autism, and they compared consumption of animal products in general to the Nazi Holocaust. There's your PETA. Radicalized vegetarians, fanatic vegans. Could we all have a little more conscience about how we treat animals? I guess. Steaks, burgers, and wings for 10 billion people is not sustainable. But PETA? Alienating people for a cause? Doesn't seem the way to go. And now, as if they have nothing better to do, they are taking on the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club, asking freedom for Phil the Groundhog. As I said, I'm not a big fan of Groundhog Day. You know, the day, not the movie. If we never celebrated another Groundhog Day ever, I'd be okay with that. I don't even watch the news on February 2nd because of all the giggling news anchors who dutifully report on their local groundhog. For the record, he sees his shadow, retreats to his den, 6 more weeks of winter. Doesn't see his shadow? Spring is just around the corner. It's dumb. PETA, in their letter, offered the Punxsutawney Groundhog Club a huge gold coin to set Phil free, and suggested that the weather-predicting ceremony be replaced with the coin flip. A while back at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, they proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that's their line, not mine, that a coin flip would in fact be more accurate than a groundhog. A coin lands on the same side 50% of the time. 50-50. Thus the term, it's a coin flip. 50%. Groundhog accuracy, predicting the end of winter, about 40%. I guess you could flip a groundhog, see if it lands heads or tails, but that's cruel, right? Which reminds me, remember back in 2014, then New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio dropped a groundhog during the ceremony?
Mayor Bill de Blasio dropped a groundhog at the Staten Island Zoo's annual Groundhog Day ceremony in February, and the Wall Street Journal was there.
Well, it's not funny. A week later, that groundhog died from internal injuries suffered due to Butterfingers de Blasio. So stuff can happen. But really, most of these groundhogs live a pretty cushy life, when not in the spotlight. Average groundhog lifespan about 3 years. Some can live up to 6. PETA also suggests changing the name to Weather, W-E-A-T-H-E-R, get it? Weather, There'll Be More Winter Day. It doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? Maybe it would after a time. Groundhog Day seems to me like just one of those absurd things we made up to help us get through the tough winter months of January and February and even March. Do you ever notice how much we try and pack into those months just to distract us from the blahs? Jan through March, there's the auto show, the boat show, Groundhog Day, Valentine's Day, Super Bowl, Golden Globes, Emmys, Oscars, Daytona, St. Patrick's Day, March Madness, all of this made-up stuff. And the one we made up that actually makes some sense, the one that I like, is Family Day. A day to really highlight the importance of connecting with family. It's the least celebrated one. It's not even mandatory. A lot of big corporate doesn't even honor it. Sons of bitches. Of all the distractions in the dull of winter, Groundhog Day and its related activity is the most bizarre. And seemingly just some stupid secular celebration. But not so. Somehow Jesus got his hand in this day, at least in his way. And I'll be upfront, the following falls into the more than you needed to know category. But here goes. February 2nd, Groundhog Day can be traced back to at least the 16th century. February 2nd is also known in Christian circles as Candlemas. Candlemas, Feb 2, is the 40th and final day of the Christmas Epiphany. Traditions vary, but Christians must take down all of their decorations on Candlemas. And often there will be a liturgy at the church where you go and light candles. In the old days, they might also sacrifice a lamb. How's church, honey? Well, the kebabs were a little dry, but, otherwise good. Well, how does this tie into the groundhog and his abilities as a meteorological prognosticator? That part is kind of coincidental. Groundhog Day has origins with the Pennsylvania Dutch, who actually were immigrants from German-speaking regions of Europe. Back in the old country, February 2nd was a big deal, and they brought the tradition with them to America. They were strongly Christian. They honored Candlemas, and it seemed appropriate that at the end of the 40-day Christmas Epiphany, it was normal to wonder if spring might be nigh. They believed in the power of the badger. That's right, the badger. You see, folk legend and superstition was often their science. They believed that if the badger saw his shadow on Candlemas, etc., etc. Actually, they thought if the badger saw his shadow, it would be 4 more weeks of winter, not 6. Badger Day was the most popular, but in various German regions, they also used the bear or the fox's shadow. So they also made Candlemas Badger Day. And I'm not making this up. So it's kind of tied into Christianity, but not. You know those people who make that joke on Easter Sunday about Jesus emerging from the tomb? And if he sees his shadow, 6 more weeks of winter? Oh, I'm not making that terrible sacrilegious joke. I'm just saying that people do. Well, as it turns out, it's not that far from the truth, is it? It's not that far from Candlemas. As the immigrants brought and kept up the tradition in America, in the heart of Pennsylvania, there were actually more groundhogs there than badgers. Over time, the current rodent began to steal the day. Groundhog Day. Sorry, badger. The most famous Pennsylvania land beaver is Punxsutawney Phil. Got his name, by the way, from the town of Punxsutawney, whose population is largely of German origin. And in the 1960s, they gave a nod to King Philip of Germany, calling their little groundhog Phil. And when in Punxsutawney, be sure to visit the home of Phil. It's called Gobbler's Knob. Well, there's nothing funny about that, and no innuendo either, so let's just move on. Should note, too, that for centuries, the Groundhog Day tradition involved eating the groundhog after he made his prediction. No one does that anymore. February 2nd, Punxsutawney Phil is on TV, but he's not on the menu. Years ago, I bought this cookbook called The Joy of Cooking. It's a very famous cookbook because it's like an encyclopedia of cooking. It tells you everything you need to know. Older versions of The Joy of Cooking have a recipe for groundhog. You know, you can do cutlets on the grill, a nice stew with potatoes and carrots. A roast is good, because it's a hot meal, and then the next day there's usually sandwiches. PETA wants to end all that Groundhog Day fun. Make it a coin toss. Whether there'll be more winter day. They could still have a festival and wear those top hats. Not sure all the networks would show up to watch a coin toss, but, I wonder. The PETA motto is, animals are not ours to be experimented on, eat, wear, use for entertainment, or abuse in any other way. Sure, yeah, okay, I'm not a fan of circuses and zoos or even fur coats, but I do love my chicken nuggets. Not every day. I've always felt that humans are at the top of the animal kingdom, which gives us some privilege, as long as we don't abuse it. But Groundhog Day, really, PETA? This is the hill you've chosen to have your next battle? If you think about it, Groundhog Day is not actually cruelty to animals. It's cruelty to humans. It's cruel how we've been conditioned to pin our hopes and dreams on a rebirth of spring and a dumb animal. Say it happened. Say Punxsutawney said, guys, you're right. Let's free Philly. What about Shubenactity Sam? What of Wyerton Willie, Concord Charlie, Dover Doug, Buffalo Bert, Harleysville Hank, Okanagan Okie, Cluxsutawney Henrietta, Van Island Violet, Smith Lake Jake, Poppy the Groundhog, Jimmy the Groundhog, Gordy the Groundhog? This is just a small sample. Every city, town, village, and burg has a groundhog now, it seems. New York City has one. Charles C. Hogg, a.k.a. Staten Island Chuck, from the Staten Island Zoo. That's the one that de Blasio spiked on the ground after his political touchdown.
Mayor Bill de Blasio dropped a groundhog at the Staten Island Zoo's annual Groundhog Day ceremony in February, and the Wall Street Journal was there.
PETA has set its sights on the big one, though. This is the big one, the Punxsutawney Phil. But there's a whole herd of groundhogs out there to go after. Actually, I just looked it up. A group of groundhogs is not a herd. It's a colony, or a coterie, which is like a fancy word for colony. You can also have a crew, a crowd, a den, or a drift of groundhogs. There you go. It's always interesting to me that an item out of pop culture can change an entire meaning of something. Groundhog Day was for centuries this meaningless for fun day where a wannabe woodchuck predicted the remaining length of winter. But for the last 30 years, it's meant something else. Thanks to the 1993 Harold Ramis movie starring Bill Murray and Andy McDowell. Groundhog Day. We all know the story. A weather reporter goes to Punxsutawney to cover Groundhog Day and gets caught up in a time lock of some sort where this one day in his life just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating, regardless of his efforts to affect a different outcome.
I think it'll be an early spring.
Didn't we do this yesterday?
I don't know what you mean.
Don't mess with me, pork chop. What day is this?
It's February 2nd. Groundhog Day.
No, I thought it was yesterday.
Oh.
So now we say Groundhog Day. We use it like we used to say déjà vu. It means the same thing again and again. No change. Biden versus Trump this coming November. Groundhog Day. How did you get through isolation and COVID? Oh, it was like Groundhog Day. Toronto Maple Leafs at the playoffs. Groundhog Day. I'm going to assume that if PETA doesn't like the phrase, bring home the bacon or beat a dead horse, they wouldn't like us using Groundhog Day as a metaphor. But we do use it as a metaphor, and I assume we'll be getting a letter from PETA forthwith. By the way, I have watched the movie Groundhog Day at least once a year for these past 30 years. And you know what? It's the same every time.
Excuse me, where's everybody going?
To Gobbler's Knob. It's Groundhog Day.
It's still just once a year, isn't it?
I love that somebody actually started to wonder how many days actually pass in the movie, at least for Bill Murray. And I love more that someone actually figured it out. In the film, there are 38 days that are actually shown on screen in some manner. There are over 400 days mentioned in various dialogue, plus a calculation of almost 12,000 days, which Bill Murray's character, also named Phil, spends learning new talents and interests, such as ice sculpting and playing the piano. This calculation is based on the supposition that it takes 10,000 hours to become proficient at something. These aren't my calculations, but as I said, someone crunched all the numbers. They estimated that Phil, the weatherman, spent almost 34 years stuck in a loop in that little town until he found a way out. Oh, sorry, spoiler, he finds way out. Can you spoiler a movie that's 30 years old or older? The Godfather, Marlon Brando. Casablanca, when the plane leaves.
I think it'll be an early spring.
Didn't we do this yesterday?
I don't know what you mean.
Don't mess with me, pork chop. What day is this?
It's February 2nd. Groundhog Day.
So PETA's attempt to stop Groundhog Day may be one of their silliest initiatives ever, but as pointed out, it's certainly not their most offensive. Even though PETA have taken some of their protests right to the edge and then over, they still have a roster of celebrities who endorse them. The theory being that we look to the stars for guidance. Pamela Anderson, Paul McCartney, Kate Winslet, Simon Cowell, Justin Bieber, Carrie Underwood, Natalie Portman. It's a long list. I think PETA has more celebrities than February 2nd has groundhogs. I'll bet it's close. And I guess all these celebrities have tofurkey at Thanksgiving, and they're all kind to animals. But do you think they are comfortable when PETA compares eating animals to the Holocaust? I'll bet not. Also, I went down the entire list of their celebrities, and I was not convinced that at least a few of them wouldn't be caught at 3 a.m. at the In-N-Out Burger. I think we should end Groundhog Day, and not because we lord over the animals, but because it's preposterous. Think of something else to amuse yourself for one day in February, or in Bill Murray's case, 12,000 days.
It's still just once a year, isn't it?
And hey, PETA, coming up next, Easter. I hope you advocate for the Easter Bunny, an overworked, non-unionized employee earning less than a living wage. I've actually started my own PETA, People Who Eat Tasty Animals, and I have a motto: I am not a vegetarian, but I try and only eat the animals who are. Hey, we all got to do our part.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.